Vintage lenses. They're magical, they're cinematic, they're full of character, and they're probably something you shouldn't buy right now. So I'm gonna give you a couple reasons why you shouldn't buy vintage lenses. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my vintage glass. I have a toolbox full behind me, full of Canon, Nikon, Minolta, Fuji, Mamiya, Hasselblad. You name it, it's probably in one of these boxes back here behind me. So I'm a huge fan of vintage glass, and I think it's an amazing tool. But over the years, I'm sure we've all seen people posting videos about the Helios, or the Super Takumars, or the Nikons, or anything like that, and these amazing swirly bokeh backgrounds, and the footage just looks amazing and cinematic, and it's the instant solution you need to solve your problems. And we end up thinking it's just gonna instantly lock our creative potential and that Hollywood look we're going for. And in the end, we're probably gonna end up with a bunch of soft, out of focus footage with inconsistent color, and those lenses will end up just probably collecting dust in some drawer because we didn't get those instant results we thought we were gonna get. First and most obvious reason is manual focus. Now that may seem like a no-brainer, but there's a few different variations of this. So first of all, if you're a DP or you're constantly on set, you're usually gonna have an AC, so manual focus might not be an issue. If you're not, manual focus can be an issue. And if it's out of focus, people will notice. If I'm doing a run and gun project, I don't want to deal with manual focus. If I'm out in the blazing sun on the beach with a camera trying to pull focus and also take the shot, I don't want to manual focus because it's very difficult to see already. So if you're adding that complexity and that movement as well, trying to capture focus in addition to that, then it's going to become an issue and it could be a serious problem. Even if you're on set and you have someone like a first AC and you're using vintage glass, it might not be the solution for you because these lenses, if you're using a set, they're not like cine lenses. These lenses aren't all the same size. So if you're switching lenses, you're going to be constantly adjusting your focus and constantly adjusting your matte box. Everything that is wrapped around that lens is going to have to change every time you switch lenses. Not to mention, you're going to have to put some sort of focus wheel on there in addition to that, just so you can be able to pull focus or have somebody else do it, unless you're just going to rack it yourself. So that kind of leads into reason number 2, which is adapting these lenses. Yes, you can just get a cheap $10, $15 adapter off Amazon, throw it on your camera and be good to go. But again, depending on the lens, it might not be that simple. And if you want to go as far as cine-modding those lenses so that they have the same size and you can actually use them on set fairly easy, that's going to be expensive, and at that point it's almost the same as buying a modern set of lenses that you could use easier. Number 3 is simply that vintage glass is not perfect. Now granted, that's the reason a lot of people buy vintage glass, but knowing how to use those imperfections and when you can and can't, or when you should and should not, and how they're going to be affected in a variety of situations. There are times when vintage lenses are not the right solution, and there are times when they are going to work really well. In addition to that, you have to know the pros and cons of each lens that you're going to use, so you know that ahead of time going into a project, and you can maximize and work within those boundaries. It's kind of why I shoot film photography. You are locked into a certain ISO, you have a limited range of shutter speed, and a limited range of your aperture, and then you have no control over what those images are going to look like until you see them in post. You are basically doing your best to kind of guess and work with what knowledge you know about that camera to produce the results, but you're set within limitations and you have to work within those limitations to get the best results you can. Lenses are very prone to flaring. Some lenses don't have a great coating, so your color contrast and your vibrance in your images is going to be a lot more desaturated and not come across well. If you're shooting something that needs to be very clean and you're shooting into the sun, you're going to get a lot of halation or bloom or chromatic aberration, anything like that. And if you need to avoid those things for a certain project, you need to know which lenses to not go for and go for, and as well as whether you should even be using vintage lenses or use something more modern that's going to kind of tone those things down and work better in those situations. So the next is just inconsistency. Lenses are old, and the way they made them back then isn't as advanced as how they make them now. So your range for variation within these older lenses, especially with the time that they've been around, is going to drastically increase. Getting a full set of vintage lenses that have the same tone to their images, that have the same sharpness, and that are all set up to look the same can be difficult. People spend months, if not years, searching for the perfect pairing to match up all their lenses so they have the same color output and the same sharpness across the whole set. This is especially common when people talk about the Helios. There's certain models that were produced in factories that didn't have the higher standards when it comes to quality control. And so those lenses are usually not as sharp, the color isn't as great, and they just produce a very poor image, and they tend to break down sooner. And there's others that usually have a bit of higher standard, and they tend to be sharper and look better, and the color tends to be more accurate. So all those kind of things you have to take into consideration, because the last thing you want to do is in post be trying to match up these different images, and one's a little more green, one's a little more magenta, this one's soft, and then the whole piece just doesn't look good because nothing matches up. And that brings us to the last point of just knowing what to and when to use vintage lenses. So for example, I'm using 2 vintage lenses right now, and are they really helping tell the story? Are they really doing anything for me? Some might say yes, some might say no. The lenses I have on now are the Voigtlander Prominent Nocton 50mm 1.5, which is on the Fuji X-H2 S shooting Blackmagic RAW. So that Nocton 50mm lens is adapted to a L39 mount with a helicoid in it so that I can pull focus, since the camera that it goes with has focus built into the camera and not the lens. And then I have that L39 to Fuji adapter, which allows me to use it on my Fuji. It's one of my favorite lenses and a great lens. A lot of people compare it to Leica glass because it tends to be sharper, very soft, smooth bokeh, and then the colors tend to be vibrant and produce really well. Is it doing anything for me right now? I would argue no, but if not, let me know. But this isn't really the situation or the circumstance to use a lens like that. Now on the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro over here, I have the Super Takumar 35mm f2. This is an APS-C sensor, so I just have that adapted to Canon EF. So it's probably closer to a 50-ish. Now on this might be doing a little bit more just because of the angle, where it's set up, and how it's more of a close-up shot on me. It's going to give it a little bit softer skin tones, and then because we have the backlight over there, in certain situations it flares, and it has a really nice red flare to it. Fun fact, that lens is also radioactive, if you did not know. So this might be doing a very good job, and this might be doing a good job, but in a different way. And do these lenses work together? These are all things you have to consider and kind of work through. All the steps I had to go through just to put this Nocton onto the Fuji, and somehow it miraculously works at about an 85mm equivalent, I think. And then the Super Takumar lenses. Do these really work hand in hand? Now, like I said, I have a full toolbox full of lenses back here, and I don't get to use them enough. Why? Because they're really specialty things, and you have to know when and where to use them. They are not meant for every project. They need a purpose and a place to highlight what they show best. I shot a podcast the other day. I was like, oh man, I would really like to use this Super Takumar 35 f2 and just have a really nice soft fall off and just really soften up the skin and have a great look. And then after just thinking about it for 2 seconds, it was immediately, what am I thinking? The setup here, there's nothing in the background. It's not going to show any soft fall off. Podcast is a 3-camera setup. So if I use that, what am I going to use 2 other lenses on the other ones? And then this podcast is really nothing to do so much with creativity. So does it really do anything to the story or what I'm trying to do by using them? Whereas the reality is I should just use a modern sharp lens to get a consistent result and kind of highlight what they're talking about rather than trying to do something that these lenses are not meant to do. I had a yacht shoot a couple weeks ago. I was like, man, I would really love to use these lenses. And again, after thinking about it for 2 seconds, like, we don't have the time for that. I can't be switching back and forth between all these lenses throughout the day. The shot list is kind of in flux and coming and going. We lost a lot of time early due to an issue with the boat. So it's those kind of things where you have to weigh out pros and cons and matching up certain things. Is it going to tell the story the best? And is it going to make a difference in how you do that? So am I saying to never buy a vintage lens again? Absolutely not. I'm going to still keep buying vintage lenses because I think they force me to work in creative ways, but also realize that they're not going to be the end-all solution to your problems and instantly make everything look better. They are a tool, and just like any tool, there is a time and place for them, and knowing when and when not to use it is what's going to separate you and make you really stand out when you use these vintage lenses. So that is why you might not want to buy vintage lenses right now, although they are much cheaper than they used to be a couple years ago.